In Rise of Kingdoms, there are many ways to deal damage to your opponents. You can deal it through just normal attacks, you can deal direct single target damage, you can even deal damage over time, but one of the most powerful ways to deal damage to your opponents is through area of effect damage, or AOE for short. And in today's video, I'm going to tell you why AOE is really so powerful. What makes being able to hit more than one target the most overpowered thing in Rise of Kingdoms. So if you want to know more about area of effect damage, why it's so powerful, what is it actually bad at, and how to maximize your area of effect damage, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's start off today's video by giving a quick simple explanation of what area of effect damage is, and I'll compare it to just normal skill damage, just normal single target damage. And the real difference between area of effect damage and single target damage is the fact that single target damage only hits one target. As the target type suggests, it is a single target, cannot hit anymore, whereas area of effect damage, for people who don't know, AOE for short, is the ability to just hit more than one target. Usually it's 3 targets or 5 targets in Rise of Kingdoms. And also, one other thing we should note with area of effect damage is that for every additional target you hit, you usually reduce the damage to each by 15%. So it's not like you're dealing the exact same damage factor to every single target. So for example, if I were to get a commander like Zulang who has a 2000 damage factor direct AoE which hits up to 5 enemies, if he hits 5 targets, the 5th one is going to take dramatically less damage than 2000 damage factor, because otherwise it would literally just be too overpowered. But in the simple definition, area of effect damage is the ability to hit more than one target, usually on an active skill, whereas single target damage is, as the name suggests, only going to hit a singular target. So now you may be thinking, I've always known area of effect damage is powerful, I probably already know what it is, but why is it so powerful? And I think this is definitely something important to understand, and it comes down to trades in Rise of Kingdoms and how trades work. In the real simple and short of it, it is because most free-to-play low spenders aren't going to have better gear than a whale player. I can assure you, even with my best set of gear that I've spent 3 years building, I mean this isn't exactly 3 years, but you know what I mean, it's taken a very long time to get where I have to have the equipment that I do, whereas a whale player most certainly has this set fully talented, ready to go on the open field. And if I were just to run single target damage commanders like Henry and Boudica all day, against these whale players, my trades are not going to be as amazing, because whale players are going to deal extra counterattack to me, they're going to hit me back way harder, and not to mention, if they hit me with their own active skills because of their better equipment and sometimes better commanders, it's just going to melt through my marches. So the reason that AoE gains a ton of strength is because you have the ability to deal damage without taking damage back. Whenever you're fighting a whale player, if you have even 20 to 30% less stats than them and they're getting a better trade against you, your area of effect damage, which is hitting enemy troops and you're not taking any damage back, will make up for that difference and will often even bring you to a positive trade level. So area of effect damage is extremely strong because it allows you to attack enemies who technically cannot hit you back. So you could even fight just one whale march. So maybe one whale march is until it's a cater and you're getting a bad trade against that, but you drop an AoE into the next 2 other marches that whale player has, and you're going to get a much better trade. So you might even sacrifice a little bit in the short term with AoE for a better trade overall. So really, area of effect damage is just a way for lower spender players to almost improve their trades on the open field, especially when you're fighting against a whale. Obviously, if it was a KVK of just low spenders, which doesn't exist, but if it did, your single target commanders would be adequate. You wouldn't need to even worry about AoE. Why would you care? Yes, it's going to get you slightly better trades and all, but single target commanders would perform fine. But in an AC, Imperium, KVK, whatever it may be, you're going to need area of effect damage to keep up with players who have max tech, who have the best gear, who have the best commanders, the best armaments. They're just going to be one tier ahead of you. There's really no way to stop that. So AoE is the best way to kind of close the gap and deal the extra damage that you need to improve your position on the open field. Not to mention that AoE damage is just a strong way of dealing way more damage factor. It is quite literally higher damage factor compared to a single target commander. For example, Zulang 2000 damage to 5 targets. If we put all the 15% in and I can't be bothered calculating it fully, he probably deals around 4000 damage factor, maybe in the high 3000s. Whereas Henry is just literally only dealing 2,300. So just AoE damage in general, not only is it allowing you to deal damage without being hit back, it is quite literally allowing you to deal much higher amounts of damage factor than any single commander in the game can. I think even if you go down to some of the oldest AoE commanders, you'll probably notice they still have ridiculous high amounts of damage factor compared to other commanders. I mean, I don't know if I would say that Leonidas counts as a commander because his active skill is a bit weird, but if we look at like a pure AoE commander, Guan Yu as an example, he has a really nice 2000 damage 3 target AoE. Maybe we go look at some of the older archer commanders, someone such as even Artemisia. Her AoE is probably still going to be dealing more damage than the whole entire active skill of a Henry. Or even YSG, his active skill is definitely going to deal more damage than the active skill of a Henry. And even Thutmose, funny enough, his active skill can possibly be dealing even more damage than the active skill of a Henry. Maybe Thutmose is a stretch because he only has 1000 damage factor, but nonetheless, he is still going to deal extremely high damage factor compared to the other commanders around him because of his AoE, allowing him to technically deal 3 rounds of active skill damage, except it's to 3 different targets, but 2 of them can't hit him back. So really nice effects of AoE there. Pretty much in general, it allows you to get better trades against whales, it improves your literal damage on the open field, and also it is basically allowing you to get away with hitting other players without being hit back, which is why AoE damage is just ridiculously powerful. Now that being said, AoE commanders and AoE does actually struggle in some situations. There are some points in the game where it's like, I would actually rather have single target damage in this situation, and the first time this really becomes evident is when you're in 1v1 situations. I think that would be very clear. If you're literally doing a one-on-one fight between commanders, you would most likely rather have 2 single target commanders than you would have an AoE commander, and that's because generally when it comes to hitting one singular target, AoE commanders have like 200, 300, 400 less damage factor than the absolute meta commanders of the time. So for example, Zulang 2000 damage factor to 5 targets, compare that with Hao Bing, who released at the same time, and Hao Bing is a single target commander. Hao Bing does 2700 to a single target. So you'll notice these single target commanders, as their damage factor would suggest, are really good in 1v1 situations and will often outperform some of these AoE commanders. Like for example, I think that I would say pretty confidently, Boudica Prime with a Henry would probably outperform a Herman with a Henry in a 1v1 because Herman's AoE just is not going to be as strong as the Boudica Prime's direct damage factor. And even if you go even further than that, Herman YSG will probably lose to a Boudica YSG just because the damage on Boudica, her single target damage, is enough to almost carry you over that finish line, even though it's only an extra 300 difference. But if you think about it, if you gave like Hao Bing 300 damage factor, he would be sitting at 3000. So it does make a massive difference the amount of extra damage you can deal with a single target commander, especially over those longer 1v1 situations, which is why often you'll notice most rally commanders are single target, and there's a few exceptions I'll talk about. And then also most open field commanders, which are AoE, are made for the open field. They're made to be out there dealing that area of effect damage, which is their biggest strong suit. The other thing that AoE struggles with is often the commanders that have given AoE effects are slightly more glass cannons. I think that's definitely fair to say. So if we look at pretty much any troop type, infantry, you've got CPO. He's not really a glass cannon, but I think he's an exception to the rule. But even then, compared to some of the other infantry commanders, he can be slightly more squishy for what that's worth. I mean, even Gorgo, I would say, he's a little bit more tanky than CPO in some regards. Then you could even look at someone like Guan Yu. I think he's the best example where a lot of his damage is just glass cannon damage factor, AoE damage factor, all of it is just glass cannon. So you'll notice Guan Yu, really good example of that. Lao Che, also a pretty good example, is not too tanky and is mainly just a glass cannon, high damage AoE commander. Even Joan Prime, she's a great example of this, glass cannon, high damage AoE commander. And then even when you look at the archers, YSGs, Yul Lang, even Nebuchadnezzar in some situations. I mean, Artemisia is another exception here, but you'll notice most of the commanders in the game who have AoE damage are very squishy. They're not made to be run by themselves on the open field, and they often don't really work too well together. So for example, I wouldn't really put a Zulang with a YSG. It's really squishy, it's really slow, and it's just going to get taken out really quickly. I would rather put a Herman with a YSG, and even though Herman has AoE, he's got other tanky stats which make up for that. And also Herman's AoE is lower than those commanders. Or a Henry with a YSG. Henry has single target damage, but Henry is super tanky, so you'll notice most of the time AoE commanders do struggle with being tanky on the open field. There obviously are a few exceptions to these. Obviously, you can say someone like Artemisia is an exception, that's certainly true, but even her kit, she has no march speed, which means she often does get caught out and destroyed, and the only tanky stats she has are the defense and the health here. One thing I would also like to mention is Lilith has technically made something new with AoE recently, where they said that you can gain extra damage factor to just a singular target. They did this with Nebuchadnezzar as well, and you'll notice this type of AoE only works with a rally commander. Often rally commanders have this, which is why Ashurbanipal has this extra single target damage, and the same thing with Nebu. But these commanders, while having AoE, which is amazing, also do perform really well in 1v1s because 2,500 direct damage to one target is really nice. Now the next thing I would like to talk about is how would you maximize your AoE value. Obviously, area of effect damage is a fairly scarce thing. Most commanders do not have it. A lot of the newer commanders who are primaries also don't have it. If we go through some of the most recent releases and we look at the AoE commanders, archers have received a lot because they are usually AoE commanders. You got Zulang, you got Herman, and Ashurbanipal. But then you've also got Boudica Prime, you've got also Henry, and also Ditto for what that's worth, who are single target commanders. Infantry, most of the commanders they released have been single target, CPO and Lao Che being the only AoE commanders. And then when you look at Sargon, Tariq, and also Gorgo, and also I think Flavius is a single target commander. So a lot of these commanders are single target. Same thing with the cavalry. You've got Nevsky, you've got Justinian, you've also got Bertrand who was single target, with the only real good AoE commander being Joan Prime. So AoE damage is very scarce. You have to be able to utilize it to its maximum value to make it as strong as possible. And the first thing I'd say pretty much everyone should do with their AoE commanders is give them your best equipment. Whichever march is running your strongest AoE commanders that are at the most meta level, give them the strongest equipment you can. As you can see, I'm running Herman with a Zulang right now, or Zulang with a Herman, Zulang being the primary, and so Zulang has my best equipment and my best armaments because his AoE damage is going to get me probably the most kills on the open field, and for that reason, I want to make him as stacked as possible. I want to increase his damage as much as possible. I want to make him as tanky as possible so he can last the longest and deal the most damage. Whereas my other commanders, they're just there to either deal as many kills as they can or just be somewhat there as a tank. My Henry YSG is both a mixture of damage and tankiness, and it's more of a distraction march. My Boudica Ashurbanipal, it's just a mixture of damage and some of tankiness, so it's once again more of a distraction march, where the Zulang with the Herman is just going to be there to get the kills. So really, if I'm on the open field and Herman gets low, it's going to be time for me to recall out of that fight. So I'll be focusing a lot around this AoE march. It's going to be my main thing to look at, and it's going to be receiving my strongest amount of support. The other thing I recommend for AoE marches is really trying to specialize in the damage. Yes, obviously giving him some tankiness is good. Usually though, the tankiness on the primary commander or a commander in that march is more than enough. So for example, when I was running Zulang with Henry, I was just putting everything that could do damage on that march. I did not care about any forms of extra tankiness. It wasn't really an issue. If it did get hit, usually it would get a slightly bad trade, but most of the time you would be able to get away with a very nice trade. So with your AoE commanders, you just want to stack them in damage. All their talents, you want to put them into ridiculous amounts of damage. Things like Naked Rage are really good with AoE commanders. Venomous Sting to increase your skill damage even more. And then stuff like going with the Wedge formation with your AoE commanders or the Arch formation if you are running a Lao Che. So you'll notice that AoE commanders, you want to maximize their damage. You want one AoE march that's going to be your main march of the open field. It's going to be your strongest march, which is supported by your other commanders. And then you also want to stack that main march with your best equipment, your best AoE commanders, and also your best armaments. And pretty much you want to make your murder ball revolve around this march, which is trying to deal the most damage for you. Because as a free-to-play low spender, you can't really build up God tier 3 marches. you're always going to have one march that is stronger than the other. And if it can be a double AoE march, whether it's like a Lao Che with a CPO, or like I said, Zulang with a Herman, then you really do want this march to be your main carry for your mutable, giving you usually the best trade, sometimes even slightly at the expense of some of your other marches. But also, I would recommend having your other marches at a fairly strong level as well. One last thing I would like to mention when it comes to getting value from AoE is that it's not all in the PvP. You can also get value from AoE when you're fighting barbarians and stuff. Most people know this, but I should certainly mention it. And it is that if you're fighting some barbarians, you can usually get a little bit of value for your action points by using AOE damage to hit the barbarians. This also does allow me to show you that sometimes if you're on the open field, pulling back your march and then moving it in a different direction will allow you to hit more targets, especially if it's a small field fight or if you're trying to maximize your AOE value. So as you can see there, I pulled up slightly and it's allowed my Herman Prime to go within range of the enemy and actually hit them. But before, I was around where my cursor is now and my AOE would have shot this way and missed this extra target. So you'll notice sometimes readjusting your marches right before your active skill is ready to launch will allow you to almost consolidate your AoE and then just smash your opponent and deal crazy damage into their marches. So I definitely recommend trying to read the open field like that and trying to move your commanders to angle some of your non-circular AoEs in the best position possible. So now that we've made it to the end of today's video, I just want to ask you guys to do a very small favor, and that is consider joining the Archer Syndicate Discord server. If you're looking to get as much value as you can from Rise of Kingdoms and maximize your commander value as well, my Discord is going to be one of the best places to do it. So if you're looking for a Rise of Kingdoms Discord to ask questions, chat with fellow players, or even just chat with myself, my Discord server is a great place to go. The link will be in the pinned comment and also in the description, and I highly recommend checking it out. If you don't like it, you're always free to leave. Now, I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.